$19 million Jazz center brutally trolls Critic for claiming Utah lacks cornerstone in Keontae George while pushing Cam Boozer draft hopes. The Utah Jazz might not be dominating the NBA headlines right now, but that hasn't stopped the noise around their future. In fact, a recent comment questioning whether the Jazz even have a legitimate cornerstone player has sparked a fiery response, and it came from inside the locker room. A $19 million Utah Jazz center didn't just disagree with the Critic's take, he absolutely torched it, using humor, sarcasm, and a perfectly timed troll that quickly caught fans' attention across social media. At the center of the debate is Keontae George, the young guard many believe represents Utah's long-term future. While some analysts see him as a foundational piece, one critic boldly claimed the Jazz lack a true cornerstone altogether, while simultaneously pushing hype around future draft prospect Cam Boozer as Utah's real hope. That take did not sit well with one of Utah's biggest voices. The comment that sparked the firestorm. The controversy began when a national NBA critic suggested that Keontae George isn't that guy and argued that the Jazz still don't have a true franchise cornerstone. Instead, the critic pointed toward the future, floating the idea that Utah's best chance at finding a superstar lies in the draft, specifically mentioning Cam Boozer as a potential savior. While speculative draft talk is nothing new, the implication that Keontae George isn't good enough clearly struck a nerve. Fans were split instantly, but the most memorable response didn't come from Twitter analysts or Reddit threads. It came from a Jazz player making nearly $19 million per year. The $19 million troll that went viral. Rather than firing back with anger, the Jazz center chose a different route, humor with teeth. In a subtle yet brutal social media response, the big man mocked the idea that Utah needs to look years ahead for hope while ignoring what's already in the building. The post didn't name names, but the message was unmistakable. Dismissing Keontae George now is lazy, short-sighted, and flat-out disrespectful. The troll was sharp, calculated, and effective. Jazz fans loved it. NBA Twitter noticed it. And the original critic suddenly found themselves on the defensive. Why Keontae George is more than just potential. Keontae George hasn't been perfect, but writing him off this early makes little sense. The young guard has already flashed scoring ability, confidence in big moments, and leadership beyond his years. He's shown the willingness to take tough shots, handle pressure, and grow through mistakes, traits that most franchise guards need time to develop. For a rebuilding team like Utah, those flashes matter. Development isn't linear, and expecting instant superstardom often leads to misguided criticism. Inside the Jazz organization, belief in Keontae George appears strong, and the center's response only reinforced that message publicly. The Cam Boozer angle, premature or strategic? Cam Boozer is undeniably talented, and it's understandable why analysts are already projecting him as a future NBA star. But pushing draft hope narratives while dismissing current young talent creates friction, especially in locker rooms. The Jazz center's reaction seemed to highlight that exact issue. Why obsess over a high school prospect when there's a promising guard already logging meaningful NBA minutes? Draft projections are uncertain, development takes time, and hinging a franchise's future on ping-pong balls is a dangerous game. Utah knows this better than most. Inside the Jazz locker room mentality, the response from the $19 million center wasn't just a troll, it was a statement. It showed unity. It showed belief. And it showed that Jazz players are paying attention to how their teammates are discussed. In a league where young players often get written off far too early, having veterans and key contributors publicly defend them sends a powerful message. That type of locker room culture matters, especially for a franchise focused on long-term growth rather than quick fixes. Fans react. Jazz Nation loved it. Jazz fans wasted no time rallying behind the response. Social media filled with praise for the center's loyalty and for pushing back against what many viewed as unfair criticism. Some fans even pointed out the irony of demanding a cornerstone while simultaneously ignoring a 20-year-old guard still finding his footing. Others embraced the humor, calling the troll elite, perfectly timed, and necessary. In an era where players are often criticized for being too sensitive, this response struck the right balance, confident without crossing the line. What this means for Utah's rebuild. The bigger picture here is about narrative control. Rebuilding teams live under a microscope, and every young player becomes a referendum on the front office. Utah, however, appears comfortable playing the long game. They're developing talent, collecting assets, and allowing players like Keontae George to grow without unrealistic expectations. The center's response suggests that within the organization, there's confidence, not panic. And that may be the most important takeaway of all. Final thoughts. NBA discourse moves fast, and hot takes often drown out patience. But moments like this reveal something deeper. A $19 million Jazz center didn't just clap back at a critic, he stood up for his teammate, his locker room, and the direction of the franchise. Keyonte George's story is far from written. Cam Boozer's NBA journey hasn't even begun. And the Utah Jazz, despite the noise, appear committed to building something real, not chasing the next shiny name before the current one has had a chance to shine. One troll, one message, and a reminder that sometimes, the loudest statements come wrapped in humor. If you want this rewritten with more direct quotes, stronger clickbait hooks, or broken into shorter narration blocks for YouTube retention, just let me know.